Hey team, now a few years ago, Ted Lasso turned a single word into one of the most recognisable ideas in sports culture. And that word was believe. Not because belief guarantees success, but because it changes the way people feel. It changes atmospheres, conversations, it changes attention. And in modern sport, attention equals money. And while everyone was talking about the very dramatic finish to the Scottish Premiership season, I kept thinking about that sign because for the first time in decades, Scottish football suddenly had something that it hadn't had for a very long time, and that was belief. Imagine if Collingwood and the Brisbane Lions were the only two teams who'd won the AFL flag for the last 40 years. Eventually, you reckon fans from most other clubs would probably just start asking the same question, which is like, what is the point of this? Well, that has been the reality in Scottish football for decades. Two giants from Glasgow, Celtic and Rangers, every year one of them wins, and they've done it since 1985. In fact, no club outside of Glasgow has won the Scottish League since Sir Alex Ferguson led Aberdeen to the title way back in 1985 before he made the move to Manchester United. And then this season happened. Hearts of Midlothian from Edinburgh pushed the title race all the way to the final day. They led the league for more than 250 days. And suddenly, Scottish football was being written about all over the world, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and it was being watched by people who wouldn't normally care about it because for the first time in years, the league had real jeopardy. So today on Moneyball, how Hearts changed Scottish football and why belief might just be the most valuable thing in sport.
And now it's time.
It's time!
It's time for
Moneyball.
Moneyball.
Are you familiar with the story of Moneyball?
Welcome to Moneyball, the business of sport, the show for sports insiders and for fans who want to know what is really going on in sport. Hey, I'm your host, Scott Keenan, and you can subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts for this show so you never miss an episode. Now, when I started this show, Scottish football probably wasn't at the top of the list of things that I thought I might cover when I launched it, but I have been to see a few games in my time. My dad is from Scotland, and some in my family followed Dundee United, while others followed Dundee FC. It is a big part of the culture over there, and I've got a guest coming up today who's been on the ground covering it really closely this season, and he's going to take us inside the first real race for the title there in a very long time. And it is super interesting because for years, Scottish football has been a little bit like Coles and Woolies here in Australia, a duopoly with two big dogs competing with each other, and then it's daylight back to the rest. Celtic and Rangers, well, they're two footy clubs that exist on a completely different scale to the rest of the league. And what happened this year wasn't just an underdog story. This was a challenge to the system that had barely changed in 4 decades, and I reckon that is why people suddenly cared, because unpredictability is incredibly valuable in entertainment, and sport doesn't just sell quality, it sells hope, it sells belief, and it sells the possibility that something unexpected could happen. And this season, Hearts of Midlothian disrupted the structure that had been in place in Scotland for so long. It's a little bit like our supermarket wars here a while back when Aldi arrived on the scene from Germany, disrupting the system, and suddenly the competition in that sector became interesting again. And that is what Hearts have done to Scottish football, and by being genuine challengers, they have changed the conversation around the league itself. Now, you can't brush over Celtic's role in this story because what made this season compelling wasn't just Hearts leading the table for so long ahead of Rangers and Celtic. It was Celtic hunting them down, and we know that's what broadcasters want from sport. Modern sports aren't just driven by tradition alone anymore. They're driven by drama, conversation and emotional investment. And this season may have shown broadcasters something really important about the future, that Scottish football does become a lot more compelling when fans genuinely believe that more than two clubs can actually win the title. Okay, to help us unpack this some more and to take us inside the race for the Scottish Premiership this year, I've got a senior journalist at the BBC in Scotland, Paul Barnes, here with me. Paul, thanks for joining us. And Look, I've compared this to Scotland's version of Ted Lasso this season because for me, I think this is the first time in a long time that fans outside of Glasgow have had permission to believe. For people who are from outside of Scotland and have really only had football from this country come on the radar this year, did this title race genuinely feel different sort of culturally and emotionally at home there this season?
Yeah, absolutely. It was almost the biggest fairy tale we've had in Scottish football for so many years. In fact, Hearts, under foreign ownership, had a fantastic start to the season back maybe 10, 15 years ago, but then tailed away. When Rangers were not in the top flight, Aberdeen became the second force, and they had a couple of seasons where they ran Celtic fairly close in terms of maybe January, February, the turn of the year, but again, they fell away. But Hearts, it's been very different this season. From, I think, the second or third game of the season, they've been top of the league all season, and they remained there until, well, 4 minutes of the season to go when they were pipped right at the final hurdle by Celtic in that amazing climax to the season that we all saw on Saturday. So yeah, it did feel very different. Everybody in Scottish football who didn't support Celtic or who maybe didn't support Hibernian, who are Hearts' biggest rivals in Edinburgh, they all wanted Hearts to win. That didn't come from a feeling of anti-Celtic sentiment or really otherwise pro-Hearts sentiment. It was just the idea of something new, something refreshing, a change, a changing of the guard in Scottish football, and the idea that Hearts, who in themselves they are a big football club, but they're not anywhere near as big as Celtic or Rangers. The idea of them actually winning the league and breaking this dominance that lasted for almost half a century, it was like fairy tale stuff.
It's hard to believe. I mean, our sports here, our big sports are the rugby league and Aussie rules, and to think that there would be two teams that would win those competitions for 40 years is unthinkable. So it is quite incredible, and the way that Hearts went about it this year, I guess, it's one of the reasons why everybody's talking about it. Could you feel that, neutral fans and even global audiences were paying attention in a way that maybe they haven't to this competition for a very long time?
Absolutely. I'll give you a few examples of that, Scott. At Hearts themselves, they were being inundated with media requests for tickets at games and for interview requests and to cover matches from media organisations who would never have previously covered Hearts games from down south in England, but obviously in Europe as well. And Hearts have a lot of players who are foreign players, and some of the media organisations from their countries were showing a lot of interest. They maybe started showing games that they wouldn't have normally shown towards the end of the season. And even in the build-up to the match on Saturday, as part of one of our preview reports, we cast the net across global media and had a look, and there was a big article in the New York Times. There was a lot of newspaper coverage in Portugal where Hearts Player of the Year, Claudio Braga, he's from Portugal. And there was a lot of coverage from Portugal as well and from other countries, which we're not really used to. Normally, you would maybe get a small article come the end of the season in foreign media to announce who had won the Scottish title. And once again, it would be either Rangers or more recently Celtic have been the real dominant club in the last 10 years or so. So this was something new. This was foreign interest in Scottish football, and people were interested in the story. It wasn't coming from a love of Hearts, but it was more maybe people had got used to the fact that if you went to Australia or you went to the United States or you went to Spain or you went to Italy and asked them about Scottish football and the clubs in Scottish football, the first two names that would come out their mouth would always be Rangers and Celtic. But this year it was different. We know that Scottish football globally is a brand, but that quite often hinges on how well Rangers and Celtic are doing because they have mass worldwide following. You go to most countries in the world and you'll inevitably at some point stumble across somebody wearing a Rangers shirt or a Celtic shirt. Now, Hearts are a big club in Scottish football terms. They would probably argue themselves that they're maybe the third biggest club. Aberdeen and Hibernian might have something to say about that. They come from Edinburgh, a world-renowned city, a fantastic city. And them, alongside their rivals Hibernian, are great clubs. They have good support. But as I referred to before, it doesn't compare with the old firm. And the idea that Hearts came so close and they were the story for the entire season. And actually, they were still the story in defeat, believe it or not. It was something new to us and it was quite impactful, and it made us realise the strength of the Scottish football brand and the strength of the story when we realised that there was so much pickup outside of this country.
Yeah, I mean, we've been talking about it here. I know my mates who follow football have been talking about it. There is an Aussie connection at the club with at least one Australian player there now, but there have been others in the last couple of years. You sort of touched on it there. Do you think this is maybe changing the way that Scottish people look at their own football championship?
I think there's a couple of things here. This season was unique in that Rangers and Celtic were particularly poor by their own admission. In the past, Rangers and Celtic have had some fantastic players. some fantastic homegrown players, some fantastic foreign imports, and they've done quite well, quite admirably in the Champions League. Not long ago, Rangers got to the final of the Europa League, and they've been strong teams. They've simply been too strong for the rest of the opposition in Scotland. But this year it was different. Both clubs changed their managers during the season. Celtic quite a few times. There was a lot of fan unrest, and they weren't getting the consistency of results that we're normally used to seeing with Rangers and Celtic. That, coupled with Hearts having a new approach to their transfer business, a new approach to the recruitment, and an extremely savvy and experienced manager in Derek McInnes, who only arrived last summer, that meant that they could compete at a level with Rangers and Celtic that we haven't seen for quite some time. So it aligned perfectly for Hearts just until the final few minutes of the season.
Yeah, and it's that Moneyball approach, isn't it? It's taking a more analytical way of bringing in the right types of players and investing in the team. Well, a lot of people would be more familiar with Brighton and Hove Albion in the Premier League taking that approach. And I've seen a lot written this year about Hearts sort of going down that same path. But look, we talk a lot on this show about sport as an entertainment product. Take us into, the sporting arenas there. What did the energy feel like as the unpredictability of the season kind of went from one to the other? How did it feel sitting on the sidelines there, mate?
It's funny you ask that, because in Scotland, we inherently can sometimes be quite negative when it comes to looking at our sporting achievements. We're quite a small country. There are very few sports that we're able to compete on the global stage. We've had some individual sports people over the years. Andy Murray, no more so than him. We've got a top 10 in the world golfer right now in Robert McIntyre. But when it comes to team sports, it's a numbers game. Usually we're left lagging behind the top nations. So when that comes to like football or soccer, rugby union as well, Scotland have got a good team, but they're never really making it to the last four or to the final of the World Cup. And we sometimes have this attitude of we can be quite hard on ourselves. Even the Scottish national team, we've qualified for 3 major tournaments in a row. This is our first World Cup this summer for 28 years. But even until the final qualifying game, people were still a bit kind of, I don't think we're going to do it.
Really?
There's just this expectation that we're going to fail because we're not used to sustained periods of success. And we're maybe not the most confident, outspoken people. We can be quite modest when it comes to our achievements, maybe compared to the national psyche of other countries. And when you look at that in a Hearts context, I think a lot of people were loving the story of Hearts all season. But myself included, I probably did think it was going to fall away. So even when they were riding high in January, February, March, the media were getting excited, the fans were getting really excited. But even at that point, as recently as like 6 weeks ago, I think even a lot of Hearts supporters would have thought, I'm not sure if we're going to win it, we'll see if we can hold on, rather than an emphatic, we're going to win it.
Let's go for it,
Absolutely. As it got to the closing games, the last 1 or 2 games, then that sort of changed to Hearts are going to do it, aren't they? They are going to do it. This is real. This is happening. And it was interesting to see how that changed. I mean, there's a lot of Hearts supporters in our office, and maybe they didn't want to get too carried away with themselves, but for so many months, they were delighted. They were having a song and a party and a dance at the top of the league for so many months. But there was tinged with the realism of, we've seen this before.
Yeah.
This might ebb away. I'm not sure if we can do it. But it came down to 2 critical match week fixtures in the final 7 days of the season. There was midweek fixtures where Hearts beat Falkirk and Celtic beat Motherwell in very controversial last minute circumstances, teeing up this finale. But even then, I don't think the hope had ebbed away at all. Celtic had to go to Celtic Park knowing that a draw or a win would do it. They were undefeated to Celtic over the course of the season up to that point, and they actually led against Celtic in Glasgow in the first half for a period. So at that
They had every right to win it, didn't they?
Every right to win it, and they competed really well right into the closing stages. And even then, I think the thing that was more painful for Hearts supporters was the manner of the defeat. They didn't come out and win 4-0, and you might have gone home thinking, oh, well, fair and square, over 38 games. They've just been too good. We've ran out of gas, whatever. But the fact that Celtic won, and I think their second goal was in the 86th, 87th minute, and then they scored right at the end when Hearts had 11 men ahead of the ball, desperately trying to scramble an equaliser. It just slipped away from them. In the space of 5 minutes, it'd gone.
Yeah, it was proper broken heart stuff, wasn't it? I mean, they put themselves in that position. All they had to do was go and get it. And I think that the effort of Celtic under Martin O'Neill coming back in as coach and winning, 15 out of 16 games in a row to get into that position at the end of the season, that can't go unmentioned. But It was such a chaotic end to the game. Can you tell us really briefly about the drama at the end of the game, and what do you think then that drama, the way that unfolded with fans running onto the pitch, like what does that do then to the image of Scottish football after the fact, after this amazing title race?
Hearts just need to draw with Celtic. It's 1-1. There's 5 minutes left on the clock. Celtic are pushing hard for a late winner. They score it, and there's euphoria among the Celtic supporters, who at that point didn't really spill onto the pitch because there was still 5 minutes to go plus injury time. Hearts, then the ball is in their court. They need to then find something to equalise, to take the title in the very dying seconds. Celtic are pushing again for a winner, for a third goal. Hearts pushing for this second goal from them that would take it to 2-2 and grant them the Premiership title. Hearts send every man forward at the end of the game. We're talking injury time here. It's a poor free kick. Celtic intercept the ball, and Callum Osmond has a free run, runs the length of the pitch and scores it into an empty net. At that point, it was 3-1. Celtic were the champions. A mass outpouring of euphoria from the Celtic supporters, some of whom went onto the pitch in celebration, some of whom went onto the pitch and were goading and antagonising Hearts players who were still on the pitch. The game wasn't even finished. There was confusion about whether the referee had blown the final whistle or not. Apparently that did happen, but there was still time left on the clock. That is the workplace of the players. You know, when you go to your work, you should feel safe in your place of work. And when supporters are running on with so much euphoria and so much emotion and the unpredictability of human behaviour in that moment, going up and goading the Hearts players and trying to get a reaction from them, it wasn't safe for the Hearts players. I would say it was a real minority of Celtic supporters. Okay, there were nearly 60,000 Celtic supporters inside the ground, and we're talking maybe a couple of thousand at most on the pitch. So it was a real minority.
And a mix,
but the minority spoilt it for the majority. Hearts, in a statement later, suggested that some of their players had been verbally and maybe physically assaulted. We'll wait to see if there's any more detail that emerges from that. But it was quite an unsavoury end, and that was the big talking point at the end of the game. Celtic were, in the end, worthy champions. Hearts fell at the last hurdle, but a lot of the post-match chat was dominated by this pitch invasion and some ugly scenes that we do not want to see inside sporting arenas.
What does that mean then, or what's been the analysis of those actions of those fans and what that really shows about Scottish football, the tribalism and the passion which it's known for, but it's spilled over and it's not the first time that we've seen something like this. It makes Scottish football compelling, but I think it also brings this edge that does it mean, can it ever grow beyond the scale of what it is commercially?
I think the tribalism, the emotion, is something that entices a lot of people to the game. But that can sometimes slip to aggression and, dare I say, perhaps even violence as well. If you're having people coming onto a pitch and assaulting footballers, it's completely unacceptable. But maybe I should compare it to players who are extremely aggressive and extremely combative on the pitch, who get a lot of red cards and have a lot of kind of dirty play, if you like, on the pitch. Would they be the same players without that edge? Would Scottish football be the same without the scenes? Now, I'd like to think it would be, but a lot of that comes from raw emotion, people being unable to control their emotions. And if the game was more sanitised, would it be as equally an attractive spectacle? Maybe it would. I'd like to think it would. But certainly there have been incidents recently that have been unsavoury, and there will be government ministers speaking about this in Scotland. The authorities, the Scottish Professional Football League and the Scottish FA, the governing body, will be aware of this. They will be looking to try and implement measures, whether it be subsequent punishments for what happened at the weekend to the clubs involved, or whether it maybe be in legislation, drawing up a criminal framework for supporters going onto the pitch, who hopefully in time, that would act as a deterrent. But I mean, I'm interested to get your view on it as well, Scott. Like, when you see these scenes, is that something that Australian football fans would look at and think that's absolutely disgraceful and appalling, or is it more like a talking point that makes the game even more appealing?
Yeah, I think you get a mix of responses. I mean, it's not the sort of thing that appeals to me. There's something about European and British football where some fans love to hate other clubs more than they love their own. And I think that spills over sometimes. It's not something I really get behind. But I think from a commercial perspective, even Scottish football here is on like a lower tier. Like, it's on some random streamer. You can't even really get it on the main channels here. And I think whenever I've been to games or watched Scottish football, it is entertaining. And I think having these other smaller teams teams become more competitive, I think it is an interesting competition. It's a competition that's always, for a long time had connection to Australia and to Australian players and coaches. I think that's going to continue. So it can grow beyond Scotland, and it can grow in Australia and in other markets too. Portugal, advantage of the players that are playing in the league. But I think it's got to be careful about how the teams compete and how the fans interact with each other, because I think if it keeps spilling over in that way, it's not going to become an attractive commercial proposition. I just want to finish with this last question about where to from here. They've had their hearts broken this year, but they're clearly a capable club that is on the up. Do you think that this is the start of something new, or do you think the Glasgow teams will reclaim their place at the top of the league in the future?
I think the Glasgow teams next year will improve. I think there's little doubt about that. They're aware themselves of their really poor season. There's been a lot of turmoil at both clubs on and off the pitch. And Rangers have already come out and said they're going to back their manager, their German manager, Danny Rule, and they're going to provide him with investment to put into the playing squad in the summer. So they will expect to get better. Celtic will announce a new manager in time, whether Martin O'Neill stays and extends his stay at the ripe old age of 74, or whether they get a new manager in. But both clubs know they'll need to invest in the team. And they'll have been given a fright this year when they saw what Hearts did, because Hearts won't stop. For Hearts, this is just the beginning. And we've seen Tony Bloom, who's involved at Hearts now. He's an investor in Hearts. The success he's had with Brighton and also with the Belgian club Union Saint-Gilloise. And they're a club who were never synonymous with winning Belgian titles. And they broke the mould in Belgium with teams like Anderlecht, who are normally winning the titles over there. And he won the title with Union Saint-Gilloise. So there's a bit of a comparison there with Hearts. Eric McInnes spoke at an awards dinner on Sunday night, just 24 hours after the match at Celtic Park on Saturday, and he seemed to have renewed hunger. He said, "This is just the beginning for us. I can't wait to get back into pre-season training. We've got Champions League qualifiers and we'll go again." So Hearts are not going to stop. I would back Hearts to improve. This Jamestown analytics system of recruiting players that Tony Bloom brings to the club, which is kind of shrouded in some sort of secrecy. We don't know much about how he does it, but effectively we understand it's a sort of Moneyball way of finding players from leagues, looking at all their stats through the seasons and trying to fit them into the team that they've got at Hearts. I would expect that to continue. So Hearts are going to improve. It depends to what extent Celtic and Rangers improve. They have money that Hearts don't have. They have funds. They can pay players wages that Hearts, even although they're the new upstart, they can't pay those wages. But this season has shown that budget isn't everything. Good management, meticulous recruitment, a good ethos at the club and a fanatical support can take you a long way, and it almost took Hearts the full way. Will Hearts be near the top of the league next season? I certainly wouldn't put that against them. I certainly wouldn't dispel that at all, that notion. But I would expect Celtic and Rangers to be strong, and only one team can win the title.
Players now will have belief. They know what they can do. And, yes, they might bring in some additional players into the squad, but I think the fans and the players will have belief that they can go again. And we say in Australia often, sometimes you have to lose a grand final to win one. And in effect, that's what's happened here. And I'd be interested to see how they go next season. I think it's going to be really fascinating. I think it's going to make your job all the more fascinating as well next season too, mate. So thanks for joining us on the show. Appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Nice to speak to you, Scott.
Moneyball.
Okay, so they didn't win the title and it was heartbreak at the end of the season, but maybe the most important thing that Hearts gave Scottish football this season wasn't a trophy, it was belief. Because for the first time since Fergie, way back in Aberdeen in 1985, fans genuinely believed that somebody outside of Glasgow could win. And that belief has changed everything. It changed the atmosphere, it changed the stakes and the attention on the league, because we know that sports become more valuable when the outcomes feel uncertain. And that is why leagues fight so hard for competitiveness and not to have all of the power concentrated in just a couple of clubs. And maybe that is why the Believe idea from Ted Lasso resonated so strongly with sports fans in the first place. Not because belief guarantees success, but because sport is at its most powerful when people think that history might just be possible. The challenge for Scottish football now is whether this was just one extraordinary season or if it's the beginning of something bigger. Because if fans genuinely believe that more than two clubs can compete, the entire league will become more valuable and the product will become so much more watchable too. And that, my friends, is the Moneyball angle for today. If you're watching on YouTube, you can comment away, subscribe for more breakdowns of the business of sport there. You can follow the show on Apple Podcasts and Spotify so you never miss an episode. And if you've got a question that you want to ask about the business of sport, you can just email me anytime. askmoneyball.show@gmail.com. That is the show for today. Thanks to Paul for joining me from the BBC. And remember, if you want to know what's really going on in sport, you got to follow the money. I'll see you next time.